Alright, Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 159. So we're already getting a full dive into Higurama's character, and I guess it's fair to assume chapter 160 is also gonna follow up on this, right? So it could be a while until we get back to Hakari and Yuji and everyone else and the actual culling game, since I think we're getting into someone who could be one of the most important characters in this arc. Especially since we've seen Yuji look almost like emotionally broken with himself ever since the Shibuya incident when it comes to, who he is as a person. So I really like the build-up we're getting here with Higurama, because the entire point of the culling game is about killing each other for points, and since we know Megumi and Yuji are trying to bend the game's rules to avoid that, I think we might be seeing more of Yuji, going down this path again, where he has to question himself if his existence is really justified or not. And this is going back to chapter 143 when we see Yuji talking to Megumi, and he's really taking all the blame here about what happened in Shibuya. But even in the later chapters, when we see Yuji versus Hakari in chapter 157, it's almost like Yuji's just downgraded himself to this cog in a machine. And now that we're getting a character like Higurama, I think he's gonna be one of the biggest key players who's gonna try and maybe judge Yuji for himself, since we know after this chapter how critical he is on the idea of justice. And since we know even Megumi has his own view on justice, I feel like when all three of them finally meet, this could be a huge turning point for each of them. And looking back now on Higurama's backstory, I'm really curious as to how this would relate to him having 102 points already in the game. Because by the end of the chapter, when he says that line, "Even if I'm the only one, I want to keep my eyes open," I think this could be interpreted in a lot of different ways. Because even though we see him straight up lose it by the end of the chapter, when we see him call for a retrial in the courtroom, it's not really clarified how this reflects on him now in the present time. So I'm wondering if he has 102 points because he's been executing his own sense of justice, or just went insane and killed as many sorcerers and civilians as he could, regardless of, if they were worth killing or not. But I think in both cases, this would make him one of the strongest key players in the culling game, as someone who is actively participating, in it as a sport or with a motive. And I think it's leaning more towards Higurama having a motive, as in actually hoping to achieve his own sense of justice here, because since we know the culling game is taking place in various places over Japan, and since we also learn Japan straight up has a 99% rate of guilty trials ending in a guilty verdict, I feel like Higurama might be taking advantage of this opportunity in some way or another. And I hope chapter 160 follows up on this, because there's a lot of directions I can see his character going, whether he wants to, improve the country's justice system, or just go on a rampage because he's lost all hope, or whatever the case may be. But again, as someone with 102 points and a very, deep sense of morals, I really don't think it's going to be that easy for Yuji and Megumi to convince him into, making up rules without him actually getting any benefit. Of course, this all depends on what Higurama's goals could be, let alone if he's even able to make a compromise with, and overall it just wouldn't feel right if Yuji and Megumi simply convince him to make rules for them without it coming at a cost. It'd just be too easy. And who knows, maybe Higurama is hoping to cull only the true evil players in the game. Maybe he's hoping to filter them out, especially, the ones who have the most points like Kashimo. Now, I'm just throwing ideas out here. Again, I'm really curious how their first interaction is going to go and where chapter 160 decides to take his backstory. And another interesting thing I found is that it's apparently true. Japan's guilty verdict rate is in the 90s. You can Google this yourself. So I really hope Gege takes Higurama's character with a lot of sensitivity, as, someone who can easily relate to a world where the criminal justice system can be brought into question. Now, as for whether Higurama will be an antagonist, I really don't know. He could be an anti-hero or one of Yuji and Megumi's allies for this arc, but let me just say his backstory is pretty similar to what Gege had originally planned for Nanami. So for those that don't know, I think it was in the first data book we got where Gege revealed Nanami was originally meant to be a villain, where in the original backstory for him, Nanami never went back to Jujutsu High and instead stayed at his job until he suddenly killed everyone at his office. So maybe Gege is reintroducing this idea, but for Higurama instead, where we see him just snap and decide to lose his sense of justice. It would definitely make for a compelling villain. And so far, Higurama just gives me heavy Nanami vibes already, so if this is actually the route Gege decides to take with him, then again, I can't wait to see what he does with all this potential. I'm already impressed with how interesting of a character he is. Alright guys, and that's going to be the end of this chapter review, but for those that don't know, maybe you're not subscribed or this is your first time here, so this is actually my first chapter review of Jujutsu Kaisen, and I'm actually going to be doing more chapter reviews of it here on the channel, so if you're interested in more Jujutsu Kaisen reviews and content, then please subscribe for more. I'd greatly appreciate it. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Let me know how you're all feeling about Higurama, where you think the next chapter is going to go with him, and yeah, thank you so much for watching guys. Have a great day.